Well, hello, America, and welcome to the Glenn Beck program and to the Blaze. This is the network that you are building. Tonight, I want to talk to you a little bit about revolution. I think there are those in our country that are bracing right now for revolution. And normally, proponents of violent revolution have to wait patiently in the shadows for just the right moment, and then they appear. Most times they appear at the wrong times. They become arrogant and they think now is the time. And they appear and they don't like to come out of the shadows, because once they do and people catch on, they are swiftly chased back into the shadows by a society that rejects violence as a means to an end. It's just not who Americans are. Maybe other countries are, but we're not that way. That's why this is literally the definition of progressive. There was the communist and the fascist, and put this into context of the early 20th century. They didn't know all the bloodshed and everything that would happen. Communist and fascist, and they were arguing. We know that this is a better system, but is it going to be fascist or communist? And so they were arguing back and forth. Progressives said, well, both of you are requiring revolutions. We don't believe in a revolution, so we'll take progressive baby steps to get to one of these systems. Progressive fascist became the Republican, and the progressive left became the communist, still arguing back and forth. They hide because even the progressives at the beginning knew Americans don't want that, and so they look for cover, and then they wait for something, and sometimes they actually orchestrate to give them some air of legitimacy, this movement, so they can say yes, and that will bring everybody out in the streets. An event. It could be an event like Ferguson, the protest. I believe that there are many, many revolutionaries and anarchists that see this as something, hey, take the masks off. Let's go. This is going to be good. Time for revolution. Let me give you a couple examples. Listen to Louis Farrakhan.
You may not want to fight. But you better get ready. Teach your baby how to throw the bottle if they can't bite. We're going to die anyway. Let's die for something. But when we die and they die, then soon we're going to sit at a table and talk about retired. We want some of this earth, or we'll tear this country up.
We're going to tear this GD country up. So what is he doing here? He is calling for violence. He is inspiring his followers to violence. Now let me take you to Cloward and Piven. Cloward and Piven, strategy to fight the system that they hated. Cloward and Piven, they were husband and wife back in the 1960s. They were both in Columbia University. Frances Fox Piven and her husband, inspired by the Watts riots in the 1960s. And they thought, if we can just get people to burn down the cities of America and get it to spread all across America, we win. But first, we have to overwhelm the system. Now, this led to a series of violent protests through the late 1960s and early 1970s, but they hadn't taken the system down enough. They hadn't overburdened America with debt. They hadn't got enough people on the welfare rolls. That's part of it. And they also hadn't killed the American and Western way of life quite enough. Well, here she is now years later, as she is still teaching in New York. She's asked a question about violent protests. Remember, everybody in Ferguson, they're telling you on television that these are not violent protests. Here she is answering a question, are violent protests appropriate or not?
I have considerable respect for nonviolence, but I don't treat it as inevitably a necessary rule.
Got it? Not a necessary rule. She likes nonviolence, but Not necessary. She goes on to say here, it's not necessary because it's a violent society, and so it's just really protection. That's important for you to know. She says it's not a necessary rule because we live in a violent society. The professor teaching the young. It's a violent society, and so this is really protection for those who are marching because the society is doing violence on them. So here she is, the revolutionary of that era, along with others, that migrated into academia and stayed there. And the fruits of their labor now can be seen, for instance, in the places like the streets of Ferguson, with people, protesters, advocating the use of violence. But listen to why he says violence is okay.
We're supporting
Take that
everybody who's speaking out first. Okay, but not the violent
Take it full.
protesters. You support the violent protesters. Why is that?
Well, we support them because we think that, well, frankly, a black person is killed every 28 hours by a police person, a security officer, security guard, or a vigilante. And so there is violence on one side. And so this is really an act of communal self-defense.
Bingo.
A community in defense of itself from a violent police.
Even when they loot stores, even when they go and throw bricks and burn down buildings, that's reasonable protest?
I think I gotta disengage from this interview.
We should probably answer that question, considering, no?
Okay. So, two things that are important here. First, yes, because it's a violent society. He has just parroted what Francis Fox Piven has been teaching since the 1960s. Next thing, notice he disengaged with the interview. Soon as he realized, uh-oh, you're not really on our side? Uh-oh, I've got to disengage. Why? I mean, if you believe this, if you believe it so much that you're actually out in the streets and you're being with them, wouldn't you be excited to talk to the media? Wouldn't you be excited to talk to anybody? No. No, because you know, deep down, you're not going to get a society to agree with you. Martin Luther King was right. You put him